Hey, good morning. Scott Luton here with you on Supply Chain Now. Welcome back to the show. Greg White, the Supply Chain Buzz, back again, same place and same time finally.
Yes, that's right. We are back on schedule, right? We are not deterred by COVID. So
That's good. That is good to know. And we've got some good news in that regard today,
Yeah.
which we'll tackle here momentarily. I tell you, the kids are attacking the home studio this morning, so bear with me.
I have a funny story for you, Scott. I have not watched a lot of television news, or I mean, they're pretty much doing it the way we're doing it,
right?
But I saw somebody, I can't remember who it was, but they were like swatting at somebody in. I thought they were swatting at something around their head, and it turns out it was their kid. And then I heard their dog barking on CNN, or I think it was CNN. Oh my gosh, it was hilarious.
I feel that pain. I feel that pain.
Normal, right?
That's right. But it is a good pain. It is a good pain. Nothing like working from home and connecting with our audience in the midst of loved ones and kids and dogs, you name it. So, Greg, today is all about Supply Chain Buzz, where you and I take, a scan of the headlines. We pick some of the more important developments and we give our audience our take beyond the facts and figures, our take kind of what it means. So looking forward to that as we attempt to raise everybody's and elevate everybody's supply chain IQ. Hey, before we get started, and we see Don and Stefan and Jeffrey already with us here on LinkedIn. Hope each of you are doing well. Quick programming note before we get started here. If you like today's live stream, check out our podcast, wherever you get your podcast from. Today, we publish a second episode of a new series for us, This Week in Business History. And Greg, we're simply, kind of looking over the next 7 days and while going back in history to figure out some of the greater happenings related to business and a little bit of dab of global supply chain from time to time in that.
There you go. You know what? I haven't gotten to listen to this. This is the cobbler's children have no shoes, right? I haven't gotten to listen to your episode from this morning yet. But I think people also ought to, if you don't follow Scott or Supply Chain Now on Instagram, you ought to and get 60 seconds of supply chain, because that is really cool. Plus, somehow he manages to put a new dog in the shot every single time.
Hey, we love our dogs around here. So thank you for that. Thank you for that, Greg. So on one last note here on today's podcast we published today, This Week in Business History, the universal product code was the main focus and the history of that. Yeah. These days, barcodes are everywhere, beyond retail, beyond e-commerce. They're used so many different ways. And if you tune into that podcast, you'll get a sense of the background there. So check that out wherever you get your podcast from. All right, so let's welcome in a few folks, Greg, that we have already mentioned. Of course, Don. Don, hope this finds you well. Saw your hike up Stone Mountain once again. Hope that went well. You had some beautiful weather, I believe. Greg, our friend Stefan from Texas. You can't have a live stream out Stefan, right?
No, you can't. Actually, I owe him a discussion. So we were supposed to talk this weekend, supply chain stuff, and we didn't get to connect. Father's Day things. Right.
No on-time delivery there for you, Greg. All right.
I'm imposing force majeure because of Father's Day.
All right. Hey, Jeffrey Miller, great to see you. I guess you're based in North Atlanta, and great to have you on LinkedIn. Of course, a memory from from South Africa. Great to have you here. From freezing Johannesburg, she says, Greg.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that it is winter in the southern hemisphere, but my relatives from Argentina, there it is, just sent pictures of ice. I mean, just ice hanging from the trees.
Really?
So, yeah, they've gotten pretty cold weather in the southern hemisphere.
Rob Morris is tuned in via YouTube again. Rob, great to have you again. I think you were with us last week as well, so welcome back. So, Greg, with all that said, are you ready to dive in?
Let's
dive into. Let's first off
here.
Yeah. So first off, one little trivia factoid here, because I'm a big trivia nerd, guilty as charged. So today is Monday, June 22nd, 2020, and it's got a lot of relevance to today's business world and supply chain world. Where would we be without computers?
Right.
On June 22nd, 1910, Conrad Zuse was born, a German civil engineer, computer scientist, and businessman. Zeus was most known for inventing the first, and bear with me here, Greg, the first working, programmable, fully automatic digital computer known as the Z3. It's a lot of words there, which was completed in 1941. So we judge computers by how fast they are, right?
Right.
One of the ways. All right. So its average calculation speed for addition functions was 0.8 seconds. Multiplication, which clearly gave the Z3 as much trouble as it gives me, it took it 3 seconds for multiplication functions. Its program code was stored on punched film, and it weighed more than a ton. Highly mobile. Highly mobile. Some folks will say, though, that Konrad Zuse was the inventor of the modern-day computer, arguably. He passed away in 1995, and I sourced this quote that was attributed to him, which I find interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The danger of computers becoming like humans is not as great as the danger of humans becoming like computers.
Well, we have seen the former and pretty much the opposite of the latter. It's almost as if we have eschewed logic because we know that the computers can take care of that now, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So,
very interesting. Can you imagine?
People do best and computers do what computers do best.
Can you imagine having a room full of equipment and the lack of a complex problem, what you could solve with it? I mean, you had to start somewhere. Computing had to start somewhere, right?
Right.
So big reason why we're here.
We don't know the complexity of those addition or multiplication calculations as well.
That's a good point.
I mean, it may not have been 3 times 5, which is 15. 1.1 seconds.
Very nicely done, Greg, as always. But on this day, Konrad Zuse was born in 1910. All right, before we dive into the buzz, the true buzz, and the stories of the day, I want to say hello to a few folks. Let's see here. Mosen is tuned in via LinkedIn. Hope this finds you well. Great to have you here today. Brian Starn, let's see here. Yeah, Brian Staines from Rochester, New York. Hope this finds you well, Brian, up in New York via LinkedIn.
Right. That's a good supply chain school up there.
Yes, it is.
Institute of Technology. Robert
Gaines, a little further south. Robert Gaines hails from Charlotte and tuned in via LinkedIn. Great to have you here. And let's see here. So Mosen says he can't hear us. So just double check, maybe refresh the channel that you're on, that you're tuned in. It could be a little glitch there, but let us know. And Amanda and Clay both.
Stefan.
What's that?
He's getting some advice from Stefan.
Oh, okay.
Mute the player. It might be a lot of times it comes on muted. Yeah.
One final.
Hard to find the mute button or the volume.
One final comment from T Squared 2001. Hello from Baltimore. Thanks for the podcast on reverse logistics. Took me all the way back to my MBA course in 2011. Good stuff there. Hey, we love reverse logistics here at Supply Chain Now.
And the impressive thing is T Squared has an MBA.
Yes.
And has had it since 2011. So
love it.
Yeah.
All right.
Some knowledge to us.
Well, what will be impressive, Greg, is if I can get the name of this drug right as we walk through this first story. We'll see. So we're going to dive into the buzz with a quick scan of the headlines, kind of cherry picking some of the more important ones. And then we're going to scan the headlines at the end of the show too. But leading off, Greg White, don't you love a story where a big part of the narrative is about how robust the supply chain is?
Yeah.
Love it, right? We need a lot more of that. So in this story from Catherine Ellen Foley over at Quartz, we're talking about a potential treatment for COVID-19 and, like as I mentioned, the robust supply chain behind it. So a generic steroid called Dexamethasone.
Nailed it.
Dexamethasone. I had to practice that the last 3 weeks. Has shown the ability to effectively treat some of the sickest patients. Now, data is still very preliminary, as it is with a lot of these research studies going on right now, and it's not yet been peer reviewed, but it's already been through safety trials. So we may not be far from healthcare practitioners using this to treat, especially the sickest of patients. More on that in a second.
Yeah, I think they've offered this. Well, maybe you're going to go here. Well, I'm going to let you go, and then I'll see.
So the best news is, unlike what we've seen with PPE and toilet paper and a lot of other things, with this surge in demand, a lot of these supply chains have just not been able to keep up. However, Dexamethasone supply chain seems ready to handle the off the charts demand. So given the shortages we've seen with some of the drugs used to treat COVID-19, of course, this is some really good news. So consider this. This drug's already been on the market for 6 years, and it essentially is generic at this point, which is a great thing. So manufacturing plants all around the world already make it and can ship it. So we're not tied to just that, a constraint of one location. Experts say it's easy to manufacture, especially in pill form. And one more thing, the research showed that dexamethasone is most effective for the sickest patients, those on ventilators. So no data yet if the drug would be able to treat other less sick patients. But if that holds up, that might help temper demand for folks that are treating COVID-19 by just staying at home,
I think that it's a couple things that's important to note here. This is not a vaccine. This is a treatment. It was tested voluntarily on patients who were originally essentially on their deathbeds. And it was an optional treatment for them. And it did actually, arguably, again, we'll let the medical professionals speak to the details of this, but it did save lives. So that's actually very encouraging, right?
Yep. Very encouraging. Hey, the more options, the better. The more weapons we can have to fight this thing globally, the better. And in particular, as kind of the main thrust of the article is for this, if this holds up and if the data holds up and if all things appear as they are, to have one option have a lot of the great advantages of the supply chain as we've laid out here for dexamethasone. That's a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah.
So
good start to the day, Scott.
Hey, we try to start with good news.
Good news, yeah.
Good news is really important. Let's take a few comments before we dive into this next topic here.
Yeah.
So T Squared got his MBA at Morgan State University.
No way.
One of our interns is matriculating through, if I can say that word right, the supply chain program at Morgan State. We're big fans.
Yeah.
So great to have you here with us via YouTube there. Also, Brian shares that he discovered our podcast in the last 6 weeks, found them very insightful. Thank you for that, Brian. Appreciate you tuning in.
That's high.
Appreciate your feedback.
New York for sure. Yeah. Thank
you. And one more note, just like T Squared loves reverse logistics, any of our folks that are tuned in via today's live stream, let us know what topics you find most compelling and shoot us that note, and we'll see if we can't target guests and companies and experts around those areas.
So we have been getting some requests, right, from folks. So we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yep. All right. So from healthcare to FedEx, UPS, of course, we've talked about both of these companies a good bit, especially in recent weeks because of the surcharge changes, that we try to keep our eyes on. So let's talk May 2020 metrics for UPS and FedEx. So according to this story, Matt Leonard over at Supply Chain Dive says the on-time performance rates for both FedEx and UPS dropped to their lowest monthly averages thus far in 2020. So for May, and so as you can tell, a little bit of a lag here, but for May, those rates came in at 91% for FedEx and 95% for UPS.
Mm-hmm.
So according to the article, FedEx's performance took a bigger hit due to its decision to shift SmartPost volume from the U.S. Postal Service into its internal network at the beginning of the year. And as the pandemic surge in volume began to hit, FedEx didn't have the opportunity for that advanced planning and preparation, much like what goes into planning for peak season. It just hit. So that was a big factor in the disparity between on-time delivery rates, as pointed out by the story. Greg, your take.
Well, this story addresses that there are two different measures, actually, and I think, Scott, you picked the one that arguably is the more accurate of the two, or at least the more defensible of the two. So Yes. And actually, I've had a discussion with a number of folks, including our good friend Tevin Taylor from FedEx, who's um, in a principal in the FedEx supply chain organization. And of course, everybody knows supply chains were caught off guard by the seismic societal disruption of all of the lockdowns and sending everyone home, plus the difficulty of getting people to work, even if they were healthy, because of it's we almost it's almost like people are so ready to go back to work now that we forget that people were afraid to work for a time because they were afraid to be in the workplace or out of their home and contract the virus.
Yep.
At the same time, I think there is still a lot of opportunity for the traditional carriers. And this one only mentions really FedEx and UPS, but Amazon also struggled. But I think one of the questions we have found recurring over time is can the traditional carriers flex up, and can they provide last mile delivery because e-commerce volumes went up so substantially? Can they do so cost effectively? And I think
Right.
the question, at least for me, still lingers. And I've heard the discussions and points made by many people in the industry, and I don't disagree that everyone was caught off guard and that there's a good reason for it. It seems like by May we should have been closer to recovered, right? I mean, we are talking 2 months after all of this started almost. So that's still a little concerning to me. I don't think it even indicates so much as a crack, but what I think we've got to consider is that if this surge in e-commerce continues, and I think we all believe that it will, that eventually these carriers are going to have to find some level of cost-effective scalability for their supply chains.
Yep.
When peaks occur, right?
Yep. So we'll keep tracking. We'll see. Many of these consumer buying patterns, as we're going to talk about in a couple stories down the road, they aren't going to change, and we're seeing supply chains adjust on a more permanent basis because of that. So naturally, these mainline carriers are going to have some challenges, right? I mean, and on top of it all, beyond the healthcare side, we've seen a lot of other factors that have posed challenges in the getting into certain markets. So we'll see how it goes from here. June numbers will be interesting as those come in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and we welcome your feedback on this critical topic. All right, so Greg, we're going to take a deep dive into two. I've got here Wonder Twin Powers Activate. Shopify and Walmart are teaming up, right?
Yeah. So originally this was presented just as hey, they teamed up, and it kind of made the Shopify stock bump on Friday a bit. And I think I'm not looking at the specific numbers, but I think it's surging up also today about around a percentage point last I looked. But the point of this is bigger than that. It's bigger than even the share price today. It's what does this create in terms of viability for these two companies going forward? Because of course we all know, at least in the States, in the Americas, what the big player is Amazon, right? And Walmart and Shopify individually have both been trying to peel away some of that business. And because of some of Amazon's struggles and arguably self-inflicted offenses, whatever you want to call that, sellers have been looking for an alternative. They've been looking for an alternative for a long time, but they've been starting to flock away. And Shopify has been where a lot of the big sellers have gone because it's relatively easy to get live. Walmart had a 74% uptick in e-commerce in the several of the weeks of the pandemic, and these two companies have been talking off and on for literally years about putting something together. Now what Walmart is going to do is they're going to enable Shopify sellers to sell on the Walmart marketplace, which is a very large marketplace. Shopify also very large. To give you an idea, Walmart wants to put just 1,200 Shopify sellers on the Walmart platform. And the reason that the number isn't big is because the numbers of sales are big, because some of these are major sellers, brands selling direct to consumers and that sort of thing. But to give you an idea of the scale of Shopify, 75 million products And even with the growth I just stated on Walmart, Shopify sales have been growing faster than Walmart, and it's more profitable because the sellers pay a fee and handle delivery for themselves. So Walmart has really been trying to expand both the scale and the profitability of their e-commerce, which is $21.5 billion in sales. So there's a lot of opportunity and upside for them. The two companies are coordinating on fulfillment. Walmart allows in-store returns of any Walmart marketplace seller, and they're working on various other services as well. So, I don't know if everybody realizes this, but Shopify, while in the news lately, has been around since 2006. You can start on there for as little as $29 selling merch. Look,
Really?
he's going to go to the link right now and start selling Supply Chain Now hats. Sorry.
I must be that transparent. I actually did pull it up, and we've got our first hat ready to get packaged and shipped out.
Right?
Now,
That's good. Yeah, we've got an intern that's waiting on that hat. Actually, if you're an intern, you get the hat for free.
That's right.
It's all part of the bonus. But Walmart had been struggling since kind of 2009. I don't know if anyone remembers. They bought Jet.com, and then they put was it Mark Lohr in charge of, who was the CEO of Jet.com, in charge of Walmart e-com after Doug McMillon came on as CEO in 2014. So
yep.
In 2016, when they bought Jet, they really started to ramp up. It's a very good marketplace. There are sellers you can buy from Walmart, from other big sellers, and also from individual sellers. They've recently done a revamp to vet a lot of their sellers really, really carefully to make sure that the product of the seller or the quality of the seller and the quality of the product are both good. Yeah.
It seems to be inevitable between the investments Walmart's been making in terms of acquisitions of Jet.com, in terms of leadership coming on, in terms of new partnerships with major players like Shopify. Clearly, their brick and mortar footprint they've got is a huge advantage. They just rolled out the 2-day delivery service. I can't remember what they called that, to compete more directly with Amazon Prime. It seems like, Greg, it's inevitable before they really crack the code and challenge Amazon even more successfully. I don't know.
It is inevitable. I would argue. I would agree with that. It is completely inevitable. First of all, they're a much larger company. Amazon is capitalized better because their stock price is much higher. But in terms of pure sales, Walmart is a much, much bigger retailer. So, and they have a really strong and aggressive supply chain culture. A lot of the advancements that we talk about today have been around at Walmart for literally decades. Things like collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment, that was initiated by Walmart. The concentric circles of stores around distribution centers to optimize distribution, that was a foundation of Walmart's supply chain. That's still a mystery to some retailers, which is a little bit stunning, but Walmart has a highly efficient supply chain. Their stores are effectively mini malls. You can go to Subway, get your hair cut, nails done, whatever else you want done there. Even healthcare. There is a store about 5 miles from my house. Walmart has their own healthcare facility in that store, and it is glorious. I should take a video of it, but it is amazing. Doctors, dentists, dermatologists, all the D's, and all kinds of healthcare there, along with pharmacy. So it's really interesting. It kind of hurts me a little bit, frankly, to gush on about Walmart, but if the question is, do they have the wherewithal to compete? They absolutely do.
Yep. Hey, if we could, let's first off, I want to read this comment from Stefan. In his opinion, Walmart has the advantage since their stores also serve as DCs. So their DCs make money just by being a store. And now on top of that, they can sell online. Good stuff there from Stefan. Hey, Clay and Amanda, and to our listeners, hey, tell us about your experiences with Walmart e-commerce. Let us know, especially if you've seen gains in the last year or so as some of these advantages have started to come to a head. We'd love to dive in and share some of those. So Amanda and Clay, as we get any comments around Walmart's e-commerce experience, maybe we just cut and paste them and we can share them at the end. That makes sense.
A quick point on the yeah, let's do that. And a quick point on the Walmart marketplace. It's invite only. You don't just sign up. And in fact, the numbers, the quality items that I was talking about, they pulled 20 million off in the last, just in the last couple of years, it looks like. But the point is that they are trying very diligently to produce quality sellers and quality products on that marketplace, and I think that's gonna benefit them in the long term.
Yeah, great point there.
They aren't knocking off their clients' products.
Say that again, Greg. That's a really important point.
They are not like Amazon knocking off, allegedly Amazon, knocking off their clients' products and white labeling them as their own products.
Yeah.
So they're not really attempting to compete in that regard with their marketplace sellers.
Good stuff there. We'll keep our finger on the pulse of Walmart and admire, they're relentless. They're going to figure this out. And this is
Shopify too. I mean, let's not overlook Shopify here. That is a company that has declared as their mission to expand beyond what effectively was an online shopping cart into fulfillment and logistics and distribution of products to give people an option. And look, you can love or hate any of these companies, but the truth is that sellers and consumers need an option, right? Yep. Just imagine a world 5 or 10 years ago when there was only one store in only one mall in all of the world,
right?
Or all of America, right? So there is certainly room for diversification in the marketplace. There's certainly room and a need for consumers and sellers to have options for where to sell.
Yep. All right. So moving right along from Walmart and Shopify teaming up and Walmart's continued march throughout the e-commerce journey there. So we want to talk about this huge haul real quick. Alibaba and JD.com on a recent Chinese holiday. So, Greg, you brought this to the table here. As reported by CNBC, the two companies handled over $136 billion on June 18th, which is one of China's two big shopping yearly events. So 618 is what June 18th is referred to as.
Yep.
It was started by JD.com.
Yep.
Held obviously on June 18th each year. The other one, Singles Day,
right,
which was started,
most people know about,
right, started by Alibaba and held on November 11th each year.
Yep.
So some say that these numbers related to 618 may be signaling a recovery for the Chinese economy. What say you, Greg?
Yeah, I think it certainly does. I think it also signals that they felt the need to join together on this, Alibaba and JD, who are largely competitors in China, that they felt compelled to join together and to have a joint selling day. Tells me a lot about their feeling in terms of upside in their marketplace. So it also signals a significant, because this is a significantly larger sales number than Singles Day, which is a significantly larger sales number than Amazon Day. What do they call it? Prime Day, right?
Prime Day.
So, yes, resoundingly, reboundingly.
I like that last word there. So we'll see. It's good. Hopefully, we'll take every piece of good news related to the global economy that we can get. Clearly, this is a good signal for the Chinese economy, and hopefully we'll have some good news for our own in the weeks, months to come.
Hey, quick note here.
Yep.
Patrick Kelly says his video's not working, so he can't see anyone. Patrick, I just want to tell you, you're really missing out because we both look pretty good today. As far as you know.
Oh gosh. Hello, Patrick. I hope this finds you well. Tuned in via LinkedIn. Hopefully that
Produce podcast.
Glitch. That's right.
Yeah.
All right. Since we're still on kind of the e-commerce scope, rather than withhold, we've got a couple comments here from Barb and from Jeffrey, and I'm just going to go ahead and share rather than holding these to the end, Amanda and Clay. So Barb says she's interested to see what impact the shop online and pick up groceries has had on their e-commerce increase. That's a really interesting comment because if you can pull folks in, and Walmart is excellent. I think they're the industry leader in terms of online grocery shopping. If you can pull folks in for the groceries, what kind of spillover revenue can you and spillover purchases can you have there? So that's a great comment from Barb. Quick comment from you, Greg, before I share Jeffrey's.
No, online grocery sales spiked up significantly. Last week, Kroger announced earnings and their sales were up. I don't remember the specific numbers. Let's just say notably significantly.
Yes.
It was substantial, right? Now, the question remains of whether that trend will sustain. I happen to believe that it will, because just anecdotal, a lot of the people who were ordering online are people that didn't get out to begin with, the older generations who weren't getting out a lot to begin with. And now that they've found this convenience and I think the quality, if you read anything about Kroger, the quality, the satisfaction with what they were getting, and produce is always, Patrick Kelly just should turn his frown upside down. Produce is always the key to grocery, right? Yep. People want good tomatoes and bananas and whatnot. And because they did a good job of shopping for their customers, lots and lots of people were pleased.
Yep. So. Hey, so Malcolm just shot this over to us. Q1 2020 same store sales for Kroger was up 19%. Online sales, this is huge. Online sales nearly doubled. So you're right, Greg. Okay. So moving right along, want to share Jeffrey's comment, and we're going to dive into the next topic. Jeffrey says, seems to me this further recognition that warehouse that Walmart is betting that BOPUS, buy online, pick up in store, will become an increasing share of total sales. I would generally agree with that.
Yeah. Well, I think they recognize it, and to Stefan's point earlier, I think they have a better plan for it because they have planned their stores so well. They have a reasonable service area around a store that doesn't create a lot of overlap between stores. I read an article recently about something Target is doing where they're putting a fulfillment center between the stores and the consumer. And that frankly baffles me a little bit. I'd like to talk to somebody at Target about that because I'm not sure why that's necessary. I'm sure there's something I'm overlooking, but it seems to me that if you're a good retailer, and Target is a good retailer,
right,
you should be near the last mile of your consumer and be able to distribute from your stores. It could have to do with the size or the storage capacity of a Target store, which in my experience has been substantially less than that of a Walmart. So maybe that has something to do with it. Not sure.
Jeffrey clarifies with that previous observation we just shared, he's really referring to the new Shopify partnership. So good stuff there. All right. So let's keep driving, Greg, as we kind of start to wrap up today's episode, the Supply Chain Buzz.
But still on the same, right? We're still in that same vein, right? Retailers and e-com and how that's impacting the rest of the supply chain, right? So
that's right. I think, right now, so much of the supply chain news is dominated by, well, let's face it, you've said it, we've all acknowledged it, consumers, they are the king and queen of supply chains, right? Based on what their preferences, their purchases. So supply chains, as much as we want to get out in front and proactively predict what they're going to do, unfortunately, over the last 6 months, we've we've been in more reactive mode, just out of necessity. So because of all of that, and as supply chain leaders and supply chain organizations make their shifts, that is driving a lot of the news, right? Yeah. As well as this fourth story here, as we talk about, which isn't going to be a surprise to hardly anyone on this live stream, huge surge in warehouse demand. So Jennifer Smith, one of our favorites, she does outstanding work at the Wall Street Journal. If you're not following Jennifer on Twitter, or if you're not checking out her coverage via the logistics report, you're missing out. So check that out. Jennifer Smith over at the Wall Street Journal reported on this surge and the numbers behind it over the weekend. She notes that industrial real estate activity, think lease renewals, think new leases, that type of activity, that jumped 43% from April 15th to May 14th over the previous 30-day period. And this kind of surprised me a little bit. Overall, 2020 transactions are up almost 3% over 2019. Some of the supply chain moves that the article was reporting as seeing. So some companies, especially food and CPG suppliers, are securing more space, especially closer to urban population centers. That's nothing new. That trend's been in place for a while. It's just been ramped up based on some of these, again, the consumer purchasing, the pandemic purchasing decisions we've seen. And probably the other wrinkle here is these buying patterns, as the article reports. A lot of folks believe that they're here to stay, so they're shifting inventory, shifting footprint, adjusting supply chain around that. Some retailers have relied heavily on brick and mortar stores to fulfill e-commerce orders. We were just talking about that, right? In fact, Greg, you were already reading my mind because you mentioned Target already. I wanted to mention them because they have made huge strides there.
Yep.
In the article, Jess Dankert, Vice President of Supply Chain for the Retail Industry Leaders Association, was quoted as saying, quote, "There's a repositioning of the inventory and adapting systems for this new COVID era of shopping," end quote. So there have been projections from some analysts that businesses may increase their inventories 5 to 10% over the longer term so they can insulate themselves from the demand surges that have led to empty shelves and lost sales. So Greg, some of your initial takeaway from that report there.
I can't help but think back to the beginning of e-commerce, let's just say arguably around the turn of the century, around the year 2000, because I was working with or consulting with companies like Staples, who at the time was the number 2 e-commerce site on the planet. Staples was at one time. So, but wow. Where I saw retailers start to falter was right there in those type of scenarios, because here comes this new vehicle, e-commerce, and I have my standard store operations group, and the store operations group is saying, I'm gonna do like finger puppets. The store operations group is saying, don't put that e-commerce stuff under my banner,
right? Because
that's going to hurt my margins, my sales, my comp store sales, and it's also going to hurt my bonus, most importantly. So they built parallel organizations, which in my opinion are and always have been completely unnecessary. The firewall or paper wall, whatever you want to call it, between e-commerce and traditional store retail is completely manufactured by the organizations of the retailers themselves. And the sooner that they and we all who help them to transform their supply chains recognize that and consolidate those two, the better off they will be. Walmart is one who is ahead of the game there. Nordstrom actually has always had more of a what do I want to say, cooperative vision, right, in terms of that, and many other retailers who are doing that. But the ones who recognize it as it's not e-commerce, it's not bricks and mortar commerce, it's just commerce. And the companies that recognize that are the ones that will succeed and succeed more rapidly.
Well put. Well put. This will be interesting. Again, a lot of what we've seen, what folks have thought to be temporary shifts in buying choices and decisions and patterns and methods. It's interesting to see a lot of folks kind of shifting their chips and betting on these are longer plays. So of course, supply chain leaders are going to figure out how to adjust and react while protecting margin, protecting inventory, and serving the consumer with what they want and how they want it, when they want it, how much they want to pay for it.
And I think you made a really good point, and I think it's worth note, and that is that supply chain professionals will do it, not store operations people. That, I mean, of course, they'll participate, but the sooner we put all those people, the e-commerce leaders, the store operations, and the supply chain leaders, all in a room and have them solve a common problem, first of all, create a common solution to a common problem, the better off we'll be.
Yep. This will be a really interesting, although a lot of folks have already been experiencing an additional peak season. I tell you, this peak season coming up this fall is going to be a really interesting one to watch and see how things play out.
Left to buy if people are buying everything they want, right?
That's a great question. Great question. All right. So in our final story here, we'll kind of save the best and most important perhaps for last. We're going to be talking about a very interesting article. Really enjoyed this article from the FreightWaves team, in particular, Clarissa Halls,
Right.
Halls, Hawes over at FreightWaves. And it's all about racism in trucking. So I'd love to get folks to weigh in and share their comments and observations and experiences here. But for starters, let me walk through this a little bit, Greg. So the story talks about Michael Ware, who's pictured there. He's an African-American truck driver based in Gilbert, Arizona. It was Gilbert. Where was that? Where you were?
Straight south of where I lived in Tempe. Yeah.
Okay. Due to some of his experiences in the trucking world as a leased owner-operator, he founded Black Truckers United, which now has over 460 members. The primary objective is to give other minority truckers a platform to discuss diversity and racism in industry. So while some say that you don't find as much in-your-face racism in trucking as you did just a few years ago, Lawrence Bell, which is a truck driver based in Pittsburgh, Texas, says that a lot of that hatred and racism has just simply moved online. The FreightWaves team conducted a survey of 154 motor carriers of all sizes. And here's a couple of key findings from that survey. 47% viewed racism as a problem in trucking. 44% of the respondents stated they had encountered racism in their daily job. And 52% of the respondents stated that transportation companies do not do enough to combat racism. And here's where, if none of that gets your attention, here's some other places it really plays out and it impacts these entrepreneurs and these truck drivers and these professionals from really being successful. The article goes on to talk about other challenges. Some claim it's tougher to get business mentoring from other drivers, such as successful financial management, behind running your own trucking business. That's critical, right? And access to financial aid in and of itself can be a challenge. According to a survey that the article cites, the survey was conducted by Global Strategy Group, only 12% of Black and Latino small business owners who applied for assistance through the federal Paycheck Protection Program received loans, that PPP program. So, it's all about putting this, first off, really, at least my view, and I applaud the work that Clarissa and the FreightWaves team have been doing. You got to give this awareness so it can drive the dialogue. If folks aren't aware, it's next to impossible to make things better. So I appreciate the reporting. But Greg, it's also about action and finding ways once we identify these issues and these problems and these obstacles that limit everyone's success or everyone's opportunity across end-to-end supply chain. It's about doing something about it, right?
Well, it is. And what's kind of stands out among these numbers is 44% of the respondents stated they have encountered racism in their daily job. If I recall the numbers correctly, that is the population of people in trucking is not 44% Black, which means some of that is white people or whomever talking to each other in racist ways, right? Which is I still see as that to me is the systemic part of the problem. Is you've got to recognize that internal prejudice, you've got to acknowledge it, and you've got to eradicate it, right? Because it is going to undoubtedly flow out to whoever you deal with who is a person of color in your daily work, right? And that a lot of the in your face racism went online. It probably went online, and it went over to the water cooler as well, is my guess.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting and concerning statistic. So, but yes, you have to acknowledge, and then you have to actively eradicate it.
Yep. And we've had some interesting social media comments and discussions in recent weeks as we weighed in on certain really tough issues, and for that matter, we've had some really interesting offline conversations. And there are no simple answers, I think, but one of the simplest that I have personally found peace in and action in is what we control in terms of our thoughts and our actions day in and day out, and constantly challenging and re-challenging any subconscious assumptions you've made, anything that you may just do because it's your typical behavior, or you're kind of stuck in your rut, you're stuck in your personality. It's time to really reevaluate all that and really be honest with yourself in terms of how you can really be more empathetic and not just be an observer of this change that's going to be taking place, but how can you truly say, hey, I've got some of this, and be a heavy lifter in the change that's going to take place.
I think it really is simple. And it goes back to the golden rule: treat everyone the way that you would want to be treated, right? I mean, love your neighbor as yourself, right? Is the command. Somebody pointed this out to me once in very simple terms, and it doesn't matter who the person is. Would you ever leave yourself sitting on the side of the road with a flat tire? Right? That's when you know you love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. It's simple acts like that. Simply understanding, simply treating people fairly, simply assuming that they are as good as you are. It's as simple as that.
Well, we'd welcome. I'd love to feature either Michael Ware or one of the members of Black Truckers United and get their perspective and their experiences firsthand. So if any of you are listening, reach out to the show, and we'd love to have you on and learn a lot more about your story firsthand. Okay, so Greg, I don't know, moving right along from that really serious topic into some of the observations and some upcoming events we've got. So last week wrapped up a really super busy Sapphire Now event by the folks over at SAP, right? And
very super busy, yes.
And great
but
event.
At the same time, I mean, we got to hear a lot, right? And it is impressive what they're doing. One of the things that really impressed me was Christian Klein, CEO, his commitment to, at least on some products, get those years-long SAP projects, which are legend in the technology industry, in some cases down to 4 months. That's what the marketplace needs. If we want our enterprises to be adaptable and agile, then the implementation of the technology that gets them there needs to do that. And I applaud that commitment. That's not an insignificant commitment on SAP's part, because they make literally billions off of services, and so do their implementation partners.
Yep. Great point there. Also, you mentioned Christian Klein in the wrap-up Q&A with the whole leadership team. Mm-hmm. He had some very frank comments around racism and diversity, and their commitment to really, again, not lip service, but take action to move the needle there. I found that really interesting, and many other things. But I think perhaps the biggest news from last week was SAP's launch of its industry's cloud solution. So that's a much bigger conversation. Too much to go into, too much here, but we've got a link directly to a lot more information and application and stories and some examples of how it's being leveraged already in the show notes of today's episode.
I think what was interesting too was it was all free. I mean, it was a great opportunity to learn from companies that are doing things well. I mean, it wasn't just a SAP commercial. It was companies that were actually changing things: sustainability, cloud, digital transformation, all the keywords and buzzwords, but they were actually doing it, and to hear from the companies that were putting it into practice was energizing.
Yep, agreed. Good stuff there. All right. Our next opportunity. So the SAP, by the way, to wrap up that last segment, SAP Sapphire Now wrapped up on Friday. So Greg and I really enjoyed our time, kind of ambassadors for the virtual digital event, but there's a ton of content still available. I mentioned one of the links that's in our show notes. There'll be plenty of others, keynotes, breakout sessions, Q&A, you name it. And let us know if you're interested in any of that. We'll make sure you have the right links. Coming up next, June 25th, our webinar. And, the cool thing about this webinar, Greg, because we this has been on the books for about a month now. We love Tom Brennan, big fans of Rootstock, but they've added Vitamin Angels, both Bonnie and Shelley. And there's a very noble mission that the Vitamin Angels team are on, and we'll learn more about this in the webinar. But I love additions, especially with different ways of viewing things, different ways of viewing technology and ERP, especially from a kind of I'm not sure if they're technically a nonprofit, but they basically, their core mission is to help get vitamins out into the hands of those that need it globally. All right, we're going to keep driving here. We may have hit a little glitch there, a little connection glitch. So we got the June 25th webinar coming up. We also have our June 15th discussion on race and industry. That last news article, racism and trucking, that's a big reason why we're trying to facilitate and help facilitate these interactive sessions like our July 15th Stand Up and Sound Off. We've got an outstanding panel that will be weighing in and sharing some of their insights and their experiences. And we want to hear from our global audience and get them to weigh in on same things. Highly interactive session, July 15th. It's free to register. You can sign up for that one as well as you can for the June 25th one at supplychainnowradio.com. All right. Looks like we have lost Greg for now. So we're going to wrap up. That really wraps up most of what we had here on today's Supply Chain Buzz. Again, you can check out a wide variety of resources and content at supplychainnowradio.com. Oh, there he is. Let's see if we can add him right back to the stream. Hey, Greg.
We were talking about the trials and tribulations of broadcasting from home. A power box right near our house just got struck by the only lightning that I have heard so far today and exploded. So,
well, you made it back just in the nick of time. We just walked through the webinars we've got coming up, and more importantly, that July 15th frank discussion on race. We want everyone to come in and check that out. Greg, what's, as we wrap up today, today's Supply Chain Buzz, what's one key thing from Greg White? As you jump back into live stream, we're going to put you right back on the spot.
Right on the spot. It's okay.
Yeah. Only because I know you can do it. What's one key thing our listeners can really hang their hat on?
Well, over the last couple of weeks, and of course during Sapphire Now, I'm astounded to hear the terms supply chain and manufacturing and procurement all delivered separately. Oh, you guys are in supply chain. You're not in manufacturing. Oh, we're in procurement. We're not in supply chain. I think we need to, as professionals, start to think about supply chain as the overarching discipline, and then all of these practices as segments of that, of that discipline. To me, that's job one. And never, ever forget this. Consumers are the beginning and the end of the supply chain. They are part of it, right? You are not forecasting items. You are forecasting people and their actions and the influences on those people. So supply chain is everywhere.
I'm so glad we could get you back to make those two.
I'm just glad to be here.
Nice points. Barb weighs in again, talks about how yet again collaboration is key. I agree with you. Yeah. And I think, collaboration, of course, a phrase has been around forever, but meaningful, practical, diverse, more diverse than ever before. Greg, you just talked about the different functions. We got to bring everybody under the tent and really collaborate in a meaningful way. where everyone has a seat at the table. Everyone is bringing in their different insights from their walk of life or their function within the enterprise or what have you. It is, I know it's so cliche, but it is really important in 2020 and beyond to get through some of the challenges we have here. So with all that, Greg, with all that said, to our audience, thanks so much for tuning in to today's Supply Chain Buzz.
Yeah.
On behalf of our whole team here at Supply Chain Now, Scott Luton, Greg White. Hey, to our audience, hey, do good, give forward, be the change. And with that said, we'll see you next time here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.
We out.